Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? It's so good to be here with you guys. I love this TV next to me thing. This is cool. I've not done this before. This is going to be fun. I've always wanted this. I've asked for this at our church, but we're not fancy enough to figure it out. But apparently you guys are, and I love that. That's fantastic. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys this morning. One of the things Dan didn't mention is that our senior pastors, Happy and Diane, have been close friends with Dan and Roylene for many, many years. We are also a Vineyard church. I'm on staff there, and so I think that makes me and you like cousins or something like that. And so it's always neat. It's always fun to be with my my extended Vineyard family, and I'm really excited to be with you guys this weekend. Now, you guys are going to be kicking off this thing called School of Kingdom Ministry for, I don't remember, the third or fourth year this fall. And so a little while back, Dan or Josh reached out to me and they said, hey, would you come on and would you do a weekend service with us and just kind of give us a little bit of info about School of Kingdom Ministry? And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that for as little bit as possible because I hate to give commercials. I hate to be the commercial guy. But they invited me to come out and they wanted me to do a part of that. So I'm going to tell you just a smidge about School of Kingdom Ministry, and then we'll set that aside and I want to talk about Jesus. Can we do that? Can we talk about Jesus? Does that sound good? All right, cool. So I'm a part of this thing called School of Kingdom Ministry, and it's really kind of a neat story. We didn't plan to make this school with you guys in mind. I'm sorry if that's offensive. We started this thing a few years ago at our church because we've got a prayer team that prays at the end of our services. And we thought, you know what, we'd love to develop those guys. We'd love to pour into them and see if we can see more happen in their lives, and see if we can work towards a kingdom lifestyle, not just praying after services, but learning to do the ministry of Jesus as a lifestyle. And God poured out on it. We were all shocked. I think for me, the kicker was one time one of our students was over in Walmart and found this lady who was in a one of those little cart thingies that they drive around. I don't know what you call those things. A cart thingy. We'll go with cart thingy. And he stops there and says, "Hey, ma'am, this might just sound like absolutely crazy." And I realize I might be kind of weird sometimes, but would it be okay if I could pray for you? And she goes, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." And he says, "What's going on with you?" And she says, "Oh, I messed my knee up a number of years ago, and I can't really walk around." He says, "Okay, that's fine. Let me pray for you." So he puts his hand on the woman's shoulder, or maybe it was the knee, but I think he put a hand on the woman's knee. She said that was okay. And he just said, "Jesus, we believe that you love this woman. We believe that you want her body whole. Right now, I just speak to this knee to be restored." And her knee pops audibly. He feels the knee go shift in the inside of her knee, pops audibly. He's like, "It'd be really crazy. Why don't you try and stand up?" Lady stands up, completely healed, in the middle of Walmart. She's floored. She's like, "What on earth is happening to me?" And he's like, "Well, that person who just did that wasn't me. That was Jesus. Would you like to hear a little bit about him, right?" And I was like, "Holy cow. Are you serious? That actually happened? You're not making that story up?" And he was like, "Dude, that totally happened." And this guy he's not this outrageous, bold evangelist type dude. You know what he is? He's an engineer. Engineers are not known for being boisterous, right? I once upon a time I was in physics, okay, and so I know scientists, and scientists like to kind of be off in the corner and do their thing and work with things instead of talk to people sometimes. And this is one of these guys, and yet God did that. And what I think School of Kingdom, and now that's kind of a dramatic story, and you might go, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to do that." Well, you don't have to do that. But what you do have to do is learn how to live the life that Jesus is sending us all to live. And I'm becoming increasingly convinced that Jesus' lifestyle doesn't look like a normal life. A lot of us, we get saved and only our Sunday morning changes. Or maybe our Wednesday night or Tuesday night, if you go to small group or you do a ministry or something like that. But here's the thing, right? If God has taken residence in your body, then the world should be looking at you and saying, "How on earth are you living this way? This makes no sense." That's really the only response that adds up logically, in my opinion. If people look at us And they don't think, what on earth is with you? Like, how are you doing this? You're different, you're weird, you're something, I don't understand this. If people never think that, then how do you know God's in you? Because he's certainly not coming out very much. School of Kingdom Ministry is about teaching us how to live the Jesus life. And you know what? The Jesus life is bigger and broader and more amazing than any of us are living. I know I'm certainly still on a journey. We should all be on a journey with it. And so whether or not you think, oh, this is going to be fun, this is going to be great, whatever, I just want to challenge you. Think and pray about School of Kingdom Ministry. I've seen too many people's lives change too much to not say, I dare you. In fact, I even just dare you to come tonight. Come to the interest meeting tonight. What are you going to lose? 2 hours of your time, right? We've seen thousands of people. I've heard thousands of people tell me this is the best investment I've ever made in my spiritual life. I mean, your senior pastor just stood up here and said, we took the class, and it paid back wonderfully to us. I'm pretty sure that means every single one of you guys would get something out of it. So, there's some video that we're going to play. I believe some of you guys, some of your leaders here, sharing some stuff on School of Kingdom Ministry. So, they're going to do that, and then I'll stop talking about School of Kingdom Ministry, and we'll talk about Jesus. So, roll film.
School of Kingdom Ministry, especially the part about identity, the identity portion of that was absolutely amazing. I wasn't new to the kingdom, but what happened is it took the things that I thought I knew and it kind of tore them down, and then Putty went through and rebuilt all of that stuff. And I feel like that's super important, because if we're going to move in the gifts of the Spirit, I think the full knowledge of our true identity and who we are is so important and fundamental to that as well.
We lead a fairly large group here at Heartland Vineyard on Tuesday nights, and like you said, we have kids at home, we both work, but we just knew that there was something for us in School of Kingdom Ministry, and that's pretty much like where our future was, so we needed to make that work, whatever that looked like. And we knew it was going to be a sacrifice, and we even, I guess, talked to the kids about that, about how we were going to need to do this on Sunday afternoons, and that's time we would normally spend with them. So they sacrificed as well, but I think we as a family probably are stronger because of that.
I felt deeper in love with Julie throughout this. There's absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Just the way that we were able to minister to each other through that time and have healing in ways and on things that we already thought were healed, and God brought them up, and I just left like every session just more in love with her, falling more in love with the Father, and then that love pouring out into our marriage has been amazing. I mean, it's changed it, and all for the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've always had a pretty clear understanding that our marriage was not about us, but about what we're to be doing for the kingdom and how we as a couple can serve the Lord. And that this class just really solidified that and helped us understand how we can minister to people as a couple too. It's definitely made us stronger leaders. It's I would say we're better able to, well, first of all, to trust our discernment and to trust and how better to pray for the leaders and the people that are attending Celebrate Recovery. And it's given us new eyes, I guess, and new ways to view things that are going on in people's lives, and how best to minister to them and pray for them and help them find freedom.
I'll tell you, it's been a game changer all the way around, like in every area. I've actually taken some of the lesson stuff and lesson material from SOCM and used that at our monthly leaders meeting for our Celebrate Recovery leaders. I mean, all around, it's helped in leadership, in our marriage, in our parenting, in the way I interact with everybody in public. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's a home run. I mean, it will change your life for sure. And I'm excited about that.
So I just want to suggest, think and pray about it. You know, if it's not what God's telling you to do, don't do it. But I think for some of you it might be, and I guarantee it'll change your Christianity. I guarantee it, 100%. I don't care if you've been a Christian for 100 years. It'll change your Christianity. Is there anyone here who's been a Christian for 100 years? That'd be amazing. All right. Okay. So anyway, you can hold that up to the Lord. I want to talk this morning about the gospel, and specifically Jesus. Man, I'm hooked on Jesus. I can't get enough of him. He's pretty fantastic. And I want to talk about something that is really significant and really important for us as Christians. You know, Jesus, he's the anchor point. He's the center point for our faith. You know, in understanding our lives and understanding the world and understanding our faith, we all take certain things as givens and we kind of work out from them. And sometimes the way that we work out from them and the certain things that we take given determines the way that we look at the world, determines the way we understand our lives. What I want to talk about is what it means that Jesus is the center point of all center points when it comes to our faith. In John 14:6, Jesus says something like really interesting, right? You guys may have heard this verse before. It gets quoted fairly often, gets taught on. Jesus is talking to the disciples. At this point, it's the Last Supper. So he's been hanging with them for 3.5 years, and he's finally sitting down with them, and he's saying, hey guys, I want you to know, in a little bit, I'm going to go get crucified, and then I'm going to bounce back up to the Father. Now, the disciples are understandably freaked out because they've not been able to keep up with Jesus for more than like 30 seconds at a time for the whole 3.5 years. They're constantly confused and trying to figure him out. And so Thomas pipes up and he goes, whoa, hold on, Jesus, you're gonna bail out on us now? Like, we're not tracking with you, dude. Like, if you leave now, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna keep living this thing out? Is what he asks in verse 5. How do we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? We don't understand how to keep living this thing out with you gone, Jesus. And Jesus replies to him, this famous verse. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, you may have heard this verse taught on evangelistically. Jesus is the only way to come to the Father. And while that's 100% true, that's actually not the context of this discussion. Thomas is not saying, how do we get saved? That's not the discussion here. He's saying, how do we continue to follow you after you're not right in front of us anymore? We don't know how to keep walking this road. And so Jesus says, this beautiful poetic verse, he says, well, first of all, here's the thing you got to know. I'm the way. You don't have to try and follow a set of principles or teachings. You have to try and follow me. And even though I'm going to go back up to heaven, even though I'm going to go back to the Father, your task remains the same. Your task is to follow me. And as you follow me, something interesting is going to happen in your life. You're going to discover that I'm not only the road, I'm not only the path you follow, I'm actually the truth that I guide you into. I am the truth itself. And as you continue to follow me, your life is going to walk into the truth, and truth is going to begin to be formed in your heart. And when truth gets formed in your heart, you actually begin to experience a third layer, which is you recognize that I'm the life. And I begin to give you a kingdom life, a life that surpasses the life of this world, a life from eternity, not from the natural. You begin to live in that, you begin to walk in that. And all of that happens, why? Because no one comes to the Father except through me. When I go back to the Father in 2 days, 3 days, well, resurrection and a little while after that, 50 days. When I go back to the Father in 50 days, I'm taking you with me because I'm going to put you in me and I'm going to go to the Father and you're going to go to the Father in me too. And so I'm opening up all these things to you. That's actually what Jesus is saying there. And that middle phrase, I think, is very interesting to think about. Jesus says this. He says, I am the truth. Now, as Christians, we believe a crazy thought. We actually believe a ton of crazy things. Our faith is like the weirdest thing, if you ever really think about it, right? We believe God got some teenager pregnant, right? Who grew up and like decided to die rather than save himself, and that somehow by dying he beat Satan. And I mean, like, we believe a bunch of weird stuff. I don't know. It can get normal for us because we hear it so many times. We believe a weird set of beliefs. But one of them, maybe one of the most trumping weird thing that we believe is this, is that Jesus was somehow 100% God and 100% man put together in one, right? It's this thing called the incarnation, right? He's fully God and fully man in one God-man hybrid. And he wasn't half God and half man. He was 100% God, 100% man. Crazy thought. Well, but so check this out. Think about what this means. We have the person who's 100% God and 100% man saying, I'm the truth. You know what I think that means? I think that means for you and for me that Jesus is 100% of the truth that we need to know about God, and simultaneously 100% of the truth that we need to know about ourselves. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to say that statement. As 100% God and 100% man. Jesus is everything you need to know about God, and then once you trust in him, he's everything you need to know about yourself. And that's very important, because the truth is I didn't think like that for a really long time. Now, I've been in the church since I was like 2 weeks old. My dad worked for a Baptist denomination for many, many years. So I've been raised in the faith. But for a really, really long time, I did not believe that Jesus was everything that I needed to know about God. Here's kind of how it boiled down for me, and this might sound familiar. You know, this book has two halves, right? You've got the Old Testament, which is the big thick part in the beginning, right? And then you've got the New Testament, which is the shorter version towards the end. And in the Old Testament, if we're honest, doesn't God seem like he's kind of like mean and scary sometimes? Right? Sometimes God flips out, he gets angry, and people start dying. Right? And we don't understand what to do with the Old Testament. It's confusing. Why is God sending plagues on people? Why is God murdering the Israelites or the Ammonites or the Hittites or whoeverites? Why are they all dying right now? And then all of a sudden, way later, Jesus shows up, and Jesus seems like a totally different version of God, doesn't he? And so Jesus shows up, and we're like, oh, we like him. Like he forgives the woman caught in adultery. He's standing up for these. He's the one hanging on the cross saying, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And without realizing it, here's what I did, and here's what my experience is many believers do. They take the first half of the book as their definition of God the Father, and the second half as their definition of Jesus the Son. And when that happens, we create a picture of God that doesn't look like Jesus. God looks like Jesus, but with a little bit of anger and a little bit of wrath and a little bit of judgment mixed in. And the picture that we get, it's scary and it's dangerous, because what happens is we get this picture that Jesus is cool, Jesus is safe, Jesus is awesome, but if he were to ever leave the room and I was stuck with just his dad, I don't know what I think about that. Right? And growing up, I had a friend that my dad didn't really like. He was a good friend of mine, and we clicked and we had a good time, but my dad just didn't care for him. And once in a while I could kind of tell by the way my dad would respond or something like that. And so, but what would happen is my dad would put up with this guy because he was my friend. Right? And so he'd allow him to be around because he knew that we were close. And what I realized is that's actually how I felt about the Father. I thought God the Father was like, well, I don't really like this Putty guy. I'm not big on him, but Jesus, you're my son and he's tight with you, so I'll put up with him because he's your friend. Can I tell you guys something? Jesus did not save you from the Father. Jesus did not save you from God. He saved you to God. And Jesus is actually the complete picture of what God is like. The New Testament actually bears witness to this over and over and over again. In Colossians 1:15, it says that Jesus, he's the image of the invisible God. The image of the invisible God. He's actually, the word actually there in Greek for image there, it's the word that we get the word icon for. Like the icons on your computer. The icon for the computer is the picture that you look at to open up the program. And what it's saying is, Jesus is the icon of God. He's the one that you click on to understand who God is. That's what the scripture actually literally says. Right? It's kind of cool how sometimes some of these ideas can float around for a couple thousand years, and now they're on our smartphones, right? Or whatever it is. So interesting, right? He is the image of the invisible God. He is. Now, let me hit a few scriptures here that show you how important it is that we understand that Jesus is actually the picture we should be looking for. In Hebrews 1, I know I could read these off the screen, but I just like to read the Bible. It's good. Hebrews 1. Now, I've got a quick pop quiz for you guys. Do not overthink this. Who was the book of Hebrews written to? The Hebrews. Thank you. Yeah, somebody said it there. Thank you for being the brave one. This is not a trick question. The book of Hebrews was written to the Hebrews. Now, why am I telling you that? Here's why I'm telling you that. Of all the books in the New Testament, right, this and the Gospel of Matthew, which was also written to the Jews, are the two that are written to an audience that knows the Old Testament. They're the two that are written to the audience that looks at the first half of the book and says, that's who God is. And yet, here are the very first verses of the book of Hebrews. The very first verses. It says this: long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. God spoke by the prophets in the Old Testament. Absolutely. We don't pitch it out. We're not saying the Old Testament shouldn't be in the Bible. We're not saying that you can't see some things from God in there. None of that is what we're saying. God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. And he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Long ago, God spoke by the prophets. God spoke in the Old Testament, absolutely. But then after that, he sent his Son. And when he sent his Son, he was the exact image of his nature. Not the prophets, not the Old Testament, not the freaky stuff that you read that's confusing and hard to understand and makes God seem scary. That is not the exact image of his nature. What is? His Son. Jesus is what God actually looks like. And if you don't understand that, then God, you read this stuff, you read the scary things in the Old Testament, and God seems like he's kind of like mostly good as long as you don't sin too bad. Then if you sin too bad, God's going to freak out and do something horrible to you. And we can live our lives kind of like waiting for God to step on our toes. When am I going to mess up so bad that he's going to give me cancer? Or he's going to send some sort of trauma or tragedy or whatever it is in my life. When is that going to happen? And we see God as kind of the enemy of us, not wanting good things for our lives, but actually kind of wanting good things and kind of wanting to lay down the law on us a little bit. But that was not how Jesus behaved. Think about it, right? I think maybe one of the iconic stories we see in John 8. And in John 8, Jesus, he's sitting there teaching one day. And in the middle of the teaching, the Pharisees grab this woman who had just been caught in adultery. And they bring her up right while he's teaching, and they throw her at his feet, and they say, look, the law says we're supposed to kill her. What do you think we should do? Now think about this, right? Sometimes we read the Bible and we're not aware of the setting in our minds. Think about the setting here. So imagine if right here, right now, in the middle of this teaching, some people drag someone in, half clothed, because she was just caught in adultery, in the middle of this church service, and they throw her down right there. And they're like, what are you going to do, Putty? We're supposed to punish her. Can you imagine the intensity of that moment? Can you imagine the pressure Jesus is under in that moment? Right? And they quote the Bible. to say she's supposed to die. What do you think? And what does Jesus do? Jesus turns the situation around and says, look, you don't have any right to condemn her. You've got problems just like she's got problems. If you're perfect, go ahead and judge, but I don't think you are. And the Pharisees disperse. And then the woman comes to Jesus and says, well, aren't you going to judge me? Because he was the one who was perfect. He said, I'm not going to judge you. But you know what I'm going to do? You can go and be free. You can go and not live this way. You can live above this. And he doesn't point the finger. He lifts her up and he empowers her to live as more than she was living up until that point. That's the picture that Jesus gives us of the Father. That's what God's actually like. And don't take stuff you don't understand about the Old Testament and throw away the picture that Jesus gives us. Don't do that, okay? When you do that, you trespass on God's nature. You throw away his character and his heart because you don't understand how the book is stitched together. There's good reasons why these things happen in the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, while God is there, you're seeing him blurry. He's out of focus. What's in focus in the Old Testament is human sin. What's in focus is the fact that the Israelites failed over and over again. But God, it's like you ever seen those portraits where, a friend of mine is a photographer. You ever seen those portraits where it's like the person or the couple or whatever, they're like in clarity, but the background is like fuzzy and blurred out. You know what I'm talking about? You guys have seen those before. I'm sure you've seen them, right? That's what the Old Testament is like. What's in focus isn't God. What's in focus is man. It's failure. It's sin. That's what's in focus. God's blurred out in the background. Is he there? Yeah, but you can't see him super clearly because there's other factors going on. There's a law that actually God has to judge the Israelites when they mess up, whether he wants to or not, which, by the way, he doesn't and says that many times, but he's still obligated to because he's under a covenant. And so we read God's covenant obligation as his nature. And then we ignore the picture that Jesus gives us, which is what the scriptures say we're actually supposed to listen to. Jesus is what God really looks like. One last scripture here. Matthew 17. This thing is so cool, so beautiful. The Mount of Transfiguration. Let's see, we see this. Where does it start here? After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Now imagine this, right? Again, don't like Bible dumb this down. Picture you're Peter, James, or John. You've just hiked up a quote high mountain, right? So for Israel, I assume that's what 6,000 to 7,000 feet, something like that, right? So they're up there, and they're Peter and James and John. And Jesus, he probably wasn't sweaty. Jesus, he just kind of like floated up the mountain or something, right? I don't know, right? But Jesus gets up there, and all of a sudden, what would it look like if someone's face shone like the sun? Imagine that. You're standing right next to him, and all of a sudden, it's this blinding, intense, incredible light. And it says his clothes became white as light. Some of the language actually in the book of, I think it's Luke, actually indicates it's almost like there were like lightning bolts shooting back and forth in his clothes and radiating off of him. So Jesus just turned into a superhero, is what basically happened, right? He just went totally crazy, and they're like, whoa, this is insane, right? This is nuts. This is a tremendously crazy moment that these three are experiencing right now. And look at this. Look what happens. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we're here. If you wish, I'll make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So Moses and Elijah show up. And Peter and James and John, they're Jewish, right? So they grew up going to good Jewish boy Sunday school. And they learned all the Old Testament stories. They had the felt boards, and they put the felt boards and the stories. Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about. At least that's what we did when I was a Baptist, right? So that's kind of how I picture it. So they know all these stories. And in the middle of this, Jesus is going crazy, right? He's going berserk mode. And all of a sudden, Moses shows up. And Elijah shows up. And what are they thinking? Here's what they're thinking. What did a Jew, who is Moses and who is Elijah? Moses represents what? The law. And Elijah represents what? The prophets. So in the middle of this, these guys show up and Peter goes, oh my gosh, we're in a Bible story. This is amazing. I heard about this. I can't believe it. And so it says, Jesus, this is so awesome. It is good that we're here. We made it to the level of the Bible. I love this. Let's celebrate. I'm going to make 3 tents. Okay, we're going to make a tent for you. We're going to make a tent for Moses. We're going to make a tent for Elijah. And we're going to celebrate that you hit the level of the law and the prophets. He was still speaking. God the Father interrupts Peter. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. We've heard that before. What? At the baptism. But then he adds something that wasn't at the baptism. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and they were terrified. So God the Father shows up and he says, Peter, hold on, hold the phone, pause. You're missing the point. Sure, Moses was good. Elijah was good. He's my son. Listen to him. Don't listen to them. Listen to him. And the disciples freak out. Why? Because in the Old Testament, when God shows up, you die. It's a bad deal. So they're like, ah! Poof, they hit their faces. Which you would do, and I would too. That would be what we would do, right? So they hit their faces. It's a scary thing. But look at this. But Jesus, who's now acting as the picture of God himself, as the Father just said, listen to him, look at him. He's the one that I'm like. He's my son. These other 2 are my prophets. He's my son. Jesus came and touched them, saying, rise and have no fear. This picture of God you don't have to be afraid of. This picture of God, when he shows up, you don't have to go, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. This picture of God, you don't have to panic. There's a new picture and it's me. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Jesus became the sole picture of God for them moving forward. Jesus is what God looks like. Many of us are afraid of God one way or another. He's scary. He's out there. We worry, when's judgment coming? When's pain coming? When's disappointment or disapproval? When's the Father going to say, well, I'd love to say well done, but I really feel it's more like this. That's not who God is, guys. That's not who God is. Jesus is the complete picture. There's no part of God left out of Jesus. Colossians 2:9 says that. In him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. 100% of God got crammed into the human being Jesus. I don't understand entirely how that works. I know it's what the book says. He's everything you need to know about God. But here's the crazy thing. He's not just everything you need to know about God. He's actually somehow everything you need to know about yourself if you're in him too. So Jesus is the picture of what God is really like, but he's also the picture of what you're really like. How is that possibly true, Putty? You stretched me before, now you're just saying crazy stuff. It's a crazy book, guys. It's a crazy book. In Romans 6, Paul highlights something that's kind of like the explanation of how salvation works. And he says some stuff that's it can be kind of complicated. It can be confusing. But let's step through it here. Romans 6, picking up at verse 5, he's going to tell us how we got saved. And here's what he says, verse 5. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. Okay, pause. Now we're going to continue, but here's the first thing I want to point out. Most of us, the way we think of salvation works like this. Jesus died so I didn't have to. And Paul is not giving that explanation here. Now, that's not saying that there's not a layer of that's true. There's layers of that's true, and we could talk about that another time. But what Paul is saying here is this. You died along with Jesus on the cross, and you resurrected along with Jesus when he walked out of the tomb. He's not saying he did it so you didn't have to. He's saying he did it as you. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, he's going to pull that out. We know that our old self was crucified with him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing. So we would no longer be enslaved to sin. For the one who has died has been set free from sin. Now, if we've died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, he's never going to die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. For the death he died to sin once for all. But the life he lives to God. So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. What's Paul saying here? Man, this is complicated, this is deep, this is getting confusing. Here's what Paul's saying. He's saying, look, here's the deal. Each and every one of us, we know deep down that we're born not what we were designed to be. We're not born like Adam and Eve were made in the garden. There's a part of us that's broken. There's a part of us that's messed up. There's a part of us that's twisted and perverted from what we were designed to be. That person is called your old self. And the broken part of you is called sin. That's what the word sin means. It just means to miss the mark. It's like if you were shooting archery and you shoot it and it goes, and it's not the target, but hits off to the side. And what Paul is saying is this: we're all born with our humanity missing the mark. We're all born not what we were designed to be. When God says in Genesis 1, man, I want to create them with my image and my likeness so that they look like me, we're not actually born with that. We're born with sin living in us instead. And as a result, we become a failure, we become a disappointment, we become self-centered, we care about ourselves more than other people. All that stuff naturally flows out of our life. But when we turn and when we put our trust in Jesus, when we put faith in him, we say, Jesus, I want your life for me instead of my life for me. I want to follow you, not me. Then what happens is Jesus, he takes that old, broken, twisted, messed up, loser, failure, and he nails that person to the cross in himself. And that loser, that failure, that sinner dies with Jesus on the cross. Gets buried with Jesus in the tomb. And 3 days later, Jesus gets filled with resurrection life, and he resurrects different than he died. He resurrects with a new body that can do crazy stuff like walk through walls and disappear. He's got superpowers. I look forward. I think someday we get those superpowers too. He says we get a resurrection body like he does. It says that in 1 Corinthians 15. So I'm looking forward to that. That one's going to be fun, right? But he gets resurrected as a different being, as a different level. Because now he's got the power of God living in him in a new way. And in that same way, you and I get resurrected different than we died. Scriptures say we get born again. And we become a new us, not an old us. And you know what? That death metaphor is pretty final. See, here's the thing. Life will send you plenty of messages that say, you know what? You're still a loser. You're still a failure. You're still a disappointment. You're still a sinner. You're still a whatever. Now, I'm not saying that we never make mistakes. I'm not saying that we don't sin. What I'm saying is that sin is no longer your identity. It's no longer the starting point for how you are to think about yourself. The way that you're to think of yourself now is as Jesus is living in you. And Paul says this. He says, guys, what you got to understand is this. Jesus died once for sin, and then he's done dying for sin. And that means that if you died with him for sin, you're done dying to sin. You don't have to fight yourself anymore. Who you are is no longer the problem. What you got to do now is you got to reckon yourself dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Consider yourself, reckon yourself, add it up in your mind. It's actually the first thing he tells you in all of the book of Romans. Here's a command. You have to think of yourself as dead to sin as Jesus died to sin, and as alive to God as Jesus is alive to God. That's a command, actually. And many of us, like I said, we're bought into the story that this world tells us instead of the story that he tells us. We're bought into the story that like, well, sure, you'll get to go to heaven someday, but you're just kind of like limp and struggle along and always be a little bit unhappy with yourself, and you're always going to have disappointments and failures, and you're always going to be that person until you die. Guys, he came, and this book exists to give you an identity. And if your identity is in this book, it's not in the world around you. It's not in the stories that your coworkers or family is telling you. It's not in the stories that you're getting from Hollywood or the commercials or the media. Your identity does not exist out there. Your identity exists in here. And the scriptures bear witness over and over and over again is that Jesus is what you're actually like now. In Hebrews it says he's the firstborn of many brothers and sisters. Right? In other words, you bear a resemblance. You have the family heritage. Jesus is your older brother, but you look like him. You share the same DNA. You're cut from the same mold as he is. You are not a loser. You are not a failure. You're not defined by your mistakes. You're not defined by twistedness and brokenness anymore. You were, absolutely. But then you came to know Jesus. And Jesus is what defines you now. And here's the thing, right? I can stand up here and I can preach that and I can get excited. Whether you're excited or not, I don't know. I'm excited because I think the gospel's amazing, right? But here's the thing. I can tell you that, and if it doesn't touch your life and you don't contact that thing so you can live it, it's worthless to you. I'm not here to give you guys ideas. I'm here to invite you into a new life. And it's possible to live in such a way that your identity is connected to this story, not this story. And you know what happens when that happens? You begin to live above the world, not in it. You begin to live as more than a conqueror. A conqueror is someone who shows up to the fight and wins. More than a conqueror is someone who doesn't even have to show up to the fight because this level doesn't hurt them. And this plays out in a million ways. Somebody says some comment to us and we get offended and you throw something back at them. You know what happens? Anytime you knee jerk, by the way, knee jerk, you guys know what I'm talking about? Somebody says something, response. That's a place that you haven't been formed in your identity yet. And that means that that's a place that you can be formed in truth. You can get freed from that. You can get to the point where when you drive to work and someone cuts you off, it doesn't ruin your morning. You know why it ruins your morning? Because right now, the way you're living, you need other people to send you the message you have value for you to believe it. And when they cut you off, they say, I'm more important than you. And your whole day gets thrown off because I can't believe I matter if you don't say I matter. What if when people cut us off, we go, wow, Jesus, thank you so much that I matter. And God, they don't even see it. They're deceived. Lord, bless them. Bring them to truth, God. They need help. Because you wouldn't cut me off. You can learn to live above these things, guys. You can. The Christian life is not so far away that it's inaccessible. That's this thing our culture has sold to us that we got to ditch. The Christian life is not so hard to live that it's impossible. It's not. You just can't live it on your own. You just can't do it without him, without his help, without the empowering of the Holy Spirit. But what our culture needs, what our society needs now more than ever before is Christians that actually live with Jesus on the inside. Our culture does not need more lukewarm Christians or more Christians that look like the world but have like nice calendars on their fridge with Bible verses. Listen to Christian radio or whatever it is. Right? And if that's you, I'm not trying to poke a finger like, hey, that's great. Like, I listen to the Christian radio too, right? But what I'm saying is, if that's the only distinction, that's a problem. It's a problem. We need to look like Jesus because this world needs to see that he's still here. Cultures forgot that. But you know what? There's groups like this all over the country, all over the world that haven't forgotten. You guys know that in this country we still have a tipping point? You guys familiar with the idea of a tipping point? A tipping point is in any population group, there becomes some certain percentage of people that catch on to something and then it catches on to the rest. A good example would be smartphones. Once 15% of people had smartphones, it was just a matter of time till the rest of us had them. Right? You could jump on the bandwagon early or late, but culture was swinging that direction. Christianity has a tipping point. We still have more than 15% of this country. If we'll start living like it, we can swing this country. We can. But we have to start getting in contact with God. Yeah, that actually should be something to celebrate. Because culture's working real hard to look for the answer anywhere else, isn't it? It's looking for the answer in politics. Well, goodness knows that ain't working these days. Right? It's looking for the answer in media. It's looking for the answer in healthcare. It's looking for the answer in all these different areas. The answer is Jesus, guys. We have him. We have him. We do. And if we begin to live in such a way where they see him instead of us, then we can turn this thing. I believe that the best days for our country are yet ahead. They are. But it's going to be for the church to rise up and to bring our country around again. Wouldn't be the first time it's happened, right? But it means you and me, we can't be passive. We can't do this thing and just come to church on Sunday and then like kind of live hoping other people don't see our Christianity for the rest of the week, right? We got to be bold. We have something worth living for. The problem with them out there, they got nothing to believe anymore. And they think they tote that as if it's a positive thing. Oh, you must be naive to believe something. Well, you must be dumb not to. Why do you get up in the morning? Why bother? We actually have what they're looking for. Believe it or not, we do. Jesus, he's everything you need to know about God. He's the complete story. He's all that there is. And he's everything you need to know about yourself. Deep down, underneath the insecurities, underneath that stuff, he's what you're really like. And the Holy Spirit is empowering you to live that way. Let's do this. I want everybody to stand. The worship team, can you come on up and just kind of play some, I don't know, nice aesthetic music? Something? I just want to pray over you guys. Can you just put your hands out?